Well, Jordan, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk with us today, or virtually talk with us today. One of the things that Boly Welch has been talking about within our employee team is how to engage with our clients in a way that's meaningful and valuable and gives them a source of connection with other clients that are in probably pretty similar situations to what they're in. And it's hard right now when you don't have a lot of time to go out into your network and collect all the resources and hear all the thoughts. And while most of us are spending a lot of time in Zoom meetings, and that
Right.
takes up most of the day, that we thought this might be a great opportunity to take some quick snippets of people we respect and have great partnership with, and then put that out into the universe for our clients to latch onto when is convenient for them. And you were referred to us by one of our lovely recruiters, Elaine McManus, who has partnered with you for, well, with NAI for years. And obviously
Mhm.
you have a relationship with her as well. And, you know, she thought that you would be, you're the first person that's done this. So she thought that you would be a great entry point because of how you're leading through this experience that we're all in. And that in this time you're actually doing some hiring, which was exciting to hear and has been keeping her busy, which we all like. But it's also a tremendous amount of respect for the organization that you lead and you as a leader. So if you could start with just telling us a little bit about yourself and about NAI, that would be great.
Sure. Well, Amy, I'm really happy to be here, and I greatly enjoy my work with Boly Welsh, and Elaine in particular has been a real resource for us for several years as we've been trying to navigate the choppy waters of the commercial real estate industry. And oftentimes that means we have to find new staff at short notice. And Elaine has done a really great job helping us, and we have some really quality people that she's brought to our company. So I'm Jordan Elliott. I'm the president of NAI Elliott. And the last name overlap is not an accident. We're a full service commercial real estate firm that was founded by my parents about 35 years ago. And I've been with the company now for 4 years and in this role for more than two. As you know, I had a whole nother career before I started in commercial real estate. I was in education for 15 years. And honestly, that was an amazing preparation for the kinds of things that we're dealing with now, because when you're in education and you're working with kids, you're dealing with crises of varying levels all the time. And so I would say that actually became particularly good preparation for this situation. So as a company, our focus is commercial real estate. We're full service, as I mentioned. And what that means is that we handle all the needs of a landlord in the commercial real estate sphere, starting with brokerage, where we can help with the acquisition of commercial real estate, leasing. We work in some financing pieces. And then we can continue that relationship with property management, which is how our company started and kind of the core to what we do. And then we can handle a whole variety of things that are associated with that, including the property accounting and construction management and other services that really anyone would need. We don't do the taxes. We make sure we leave that to the expert, but just about everything else that somebody would need, we can help with.
Yeah, great. Well, the last 10 weeks have been interesting, to say the least. What I'd love to start with is just hearing a little bit from your personal mindset. What has been your leadership guiding light that you've used to focus you and I guess guide your leadership style as you've been leading this company over prior to this, but over the last 10 weeks?
Definitely. I think that one of our most important core values is that our employees are our most important asset and our most valuable asset. And so a lot of the work that we've been doing is just starting with how are our people doing as they experience this? And by that, I mean, what are they needing to do to serve our clients, our tenants, the vendors that we work with to carry out a lot of the things on the property? And that's kind of always where we start as a service company, is how are our employees doing? Because we believe if we take really good care of them, they're going to do a good job taking care of all of our various people that we're serving. And so, as this thing really started to ramp up, of course, we're thinking about the ramifications to the commercial real estate industry. But I think our first focus was, let's take care of our people and make sure that they're equipped to navigate this situation. So what that meant practically is that, luckily, before we actually got to the stay-at-home order from the governor and had to shut down our office, we ran a pandemic prep day where we took everyone and we actually tried being remote for the first time. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, as a company, we had never done that. We talked a lot about, just kind of in general before any of this started. We talked a lot about does remote work make sense for us? And really, the answer was probably not, because we are such a collaborative organization, and the way that we do our commercial real estate work is very team oriented, which is somewhat unique in the landscape both here and across the country. But that requires lots of meetings and lots of interpersonal interactions, and people are going out to properties together, and there's just a lot that's done communally and collaboratively. So we couldn't quite get our mind around how we would do remote work, but I think this situation really pushed us to accelerate the logistics of how we would do that, and how we would keep people working together. And so we tried it, and luckily it went incredibly smoothly. And we also learned some things that were really important. So I was actually, in preparation for this, I was looking back at the calendar, and I think it was the first week in March, we ran our pandemic prep day. And by the second week of March, the entire state was shut down and our office was
Yeah.
closed. So we just kind of slipped it in there before we came to this new reality. But that really made it easier for our employees to be able to go home. They had what they needed in terms of hardware. They'd experienced it. We kind of made a couple iterations, and then, of course, like everyone else, we've had to iterate several more times just to make this
Mhm.
work over the last couple months. But back to your question, I think we started with our people and made sure they were in good shape, and that's kind of guided us through this so far.
That's great. I can imagine that pandemic prep day gave people a sense of ease and calm that otherwise it would have been go home and let's just figure this out. That would have elevated, it's pretty anxiety inducing. And we've seen
Mm-hmm.
that and heard that from a lot of companies. So yeah, you just barely slipped that in. That's perfect. Well, I guess the pandemic prep day kind of leads me into this question of what are a couple of the ways that you've had to flex with your organization over the last 10 weeks, like that reiteration or the things that, have really forced you to get creative?
Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind there is that the reality of our industry has shifted a lot. We've been through this before, and I'm sure other business owners have had lots of shifts that have come with the recessions that we've had. Not recently, but not that far in the past.
Right.
We see that happening again. So the first thing we had to do is really think about what do the people that we're serving need, and we had to adjust a lot of our workflows and the products that we were producing to reflect this environment. So specifically, we are used to reporting to our property owners, our clients, on a monthly basis at the most frequent. Sometimes it's quarterly, and that was just not going to be sufficient in this environment. So we had to change our workflows to be providing reports on. We have almost 150 properties that we manage, so it's not a trivial change, but we had to change it so that we could be reporting out on the key financial information every week. And that meant that, again, we had to change what we were doing from the employee workflow and make sure that everybody had what they needed to accomplish those tasks. And we actually redeployed our construction management team because, as you can imagine, all the construction projects stopped that we were running effectively. And so we redeployed them to help prepare those weekly cash balance reports that we started to send to our owners. So that was an immediate adaptation we had to do in the work that everybody's doing on a daily basis.
Great. Were there any obstacles in that part of the process, or did that go smoothly?
I mean, there were definitely obstacles. I think when our clients got those reports, it was maybe not exactly in the format that they would have liked. And, the construction management team is not a group of accountants. And so they were finding themselves kind of thrown off the deep end a little bit. But
Yeah.
I think, to our broader conversation, because our people were feeling like we had their best interest in mind, we were able to make the commitment that for the foreseeable future, we weren't going to reduce our staff, because, in fact, our work was going up, even though it might have distributed a little bit differently. I think that allowed people to have the confidence that, okay, let's figure this out, and the company is going to help us. The clients are going to benefit from this. And so we had some bumps in the road, but ultimately we got it smoothed out, and now it's kind of become normal. And we're hoping that we'll be able to phase it out at some point, because things will return to some sense of normal in a more broad way. But I guess we're all wondering when that will actually be.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the material out in the universe right now in terms of leadership has been around transparency
Mhm.
and employee engagement, which sounds like you're already well aligned there as a leader. You had mentioned in our previous conversation about how you've had to pivot with your employee evaluations
Mhm.
and how that, I mean, for sure is a part of employee engagement that is probably means a lot to your employees right now. Would you mind sharing a little bit about your philosophy there and what you guys have done in these last few weeks with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think that transparency is one of the most important things in general that you can do as a leader, and that can look lots of different ways. It could just be about how you present information and really conveying it in a way that reflects a sense of transparency. But maybe more importantly, that you're sharing the kind of content that's relevant and important to the employees. So we have lots of longstanding traditions where we share out a lot of our financial information about the company with employees. We trust them to hold that in confidence, but also it gives them a point of view of how things are going in the company. Not to mention, of course, all the things we do in the industry.
Mhm.
Um, but the evaluation system is a place where we really put into action our core belief that employees are our most valuable asset, if you will, and really are what makes the company what it is. And so it's a system we've had in place for decades. My mom built an evaluation system. It was a real strength of hers and something that she applied and people really appreciated. I happened to spend some time working in that particular field in my previous career, and so when I came over to the company, I took what she had done and kind of rebooted it a little bit because it had fallen by the wayside, and then updated some things. And we're now in our fourth year of iterating on that evaluation process in its new form. And I think there's a lot out there about evaluation, and we don't need to go into that unless you're particularly interested. But there's a distinction that's worth making, I think, and that is that some best practices of evaluation are lots of kind of constant conversations with employees about their performance, which I think is great if it works, but it's very difficult to actually do that in my experience. So we really focus on a larger annual evaluation that takes about 3 months. It involves getting feedback from peers and supervisors. It involves some self-reflection, and it involves some goal setting. And when this pandemic broke out, we were just about to start our largest group in evaluation. And we had some serious conversations about if we should just set it aside. It was probably going to be, hard to do practically, another thing for people to try to deal with. But we decided, no, we should go ahead because those connections are really valuable. And now that we're about halfway through it, I have to say that I can't imagine not having run that process right now because people really need the connection that comes from an evaluation where they get feedback. It's like this, it's on Zoom, but
Mhm.
you're still having at least a face-to-face in a virtual way conversation. And the voices in your head can start to take you all kinds of different ways when you're at home and working in your den or your dining room or your bedroom, and you have to improvise that. You can start thinking, gosh, I'm doing a terrible job and I'm going to lose my job and nobody appreciates what I'm doing, etc. That stuff's happening all the time anyway, but it's probably more exaggerated right now. So we're really able to connect with a big chunk of our staff in this last couple months, and I think give them feedback that was helpful for them. And then we'll just keep rolling with it. So we'll do another group here starting in about 2 months and keep going.
That's wonderful. I tell my group all the time, in the absence of information, man, the stories we tell ourselves. And the stories are very rarely good. So, in a time like this where so much already feels out of your control and there's a lot of anxiety, to just know where you stand, good, bad, or indifferent, I think means a lot. So
Mhm.
that's wonderful that you guys are doing that. Very happy to hear that. Well, let's talk a little bit about the forward movement from here. Are you guys planning the return to work process right now? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, we are. We're spending a lot of time with it, and it's kind of interesting in the sense that our work again is very much oriented towards the spaces that people inhabit, and we manage a lot of office buildings, and so there's big questions about what does the return to work look like for the properties that we manage. And at the same time, of course, we're working on what does it look like for our employees returning to our office, which, as I mentioned earlier, is kind of the center of our company as it is for others. But as such a collaborative group, we really built it out to be a place where people are working together closely. We have no private offices. We have lots of conference rooms, all things that work really well for that collaborative model, but are a terrible fit for a pandemic.
Yeah.
So, I'd say that what we've done by virtue of the kind of work that we do that now has successfully moved remote is we have just decided to take the most conservative approach that we can. We're following all the local and state and federal guidelines as they come out, and really focusing on what's going to keep our employees the most safe and what's going to be most conservative, because we don't have to get everyone back into the office right now. Now, all along, we've been lucky to be categorized as an essential business by the way that we read the information from both the state of Washington and the state of Oregon. So we've had a skeleton crew that's been in the office taking care of some important tasks. And we have people who are out in the field working on properties, but we've prepared them with all the right, personal protective equipment, and they haven't been going into spaces that would have put them at risk. And we think we can continue that with them. And then with our office, we've just decided that we're gonna go slow. So we're gonna go from 5 in the office at a time to 10 at the office at a time to maybe 15, and rotate those, or kind of grow those groups slowly and then rotate them through. But one thing that I would also add is that there are kind of societal context pieces which you have to take into account as an employer. A lot of our employees are parents, and they're working with their kids at home, and the schools aren't open. I don't think that the summer programs are largely going to be open from what we're seeing so far.
No.
So we're having to really make sure that we reassure them that they're going to have the flexibility that they need to continue to care for their kids and work. So we've kind of built it out into groups, and we put a lot of the parents at the end. We've got some folks who, as they've told me, they didn't design their life to live in a 700 square foot apartment all the time. And so we're actually trying to prioritize them a little bit earlier to get back in the office because they're finding their productivity is suffering. So we actually conducted a survey, which is maybe an interesting piece to share, where we asked everybody for what preferences they have in terms of returning to work. We asked people to self-identify if they fall into a category that would be at high risk based on the CDC's determination of that. And then that's what let us build our groups out and how we'll rotate people back in the office.
That's awesome. I think that'll be a great thing that people will latch onto from this. Very tangible. You might get some emails about that.
Yeah, always happy to share those kinds of things with people. It's been very helpful for us.
Well, you said something in there that made me think, another dirty word that we're hearing a lot about: productivity. So there's a lot of communication out there that productivity today in the last 10 weeks does not look and will not look at all like it did before. And that does require the way leaders assess, evaluate, even conversate with their employees to change. We really, those that are paying attention, I think, have to pay attention to that part of the conversation, specifically for situations where they have kids at home, they have a significant other that's working an opposite schedule as them, they don't have incredible Wi-Fi service, so they're in and out. Where has your headspace been around the productivity conversation? What has that looked like in terms of your leadership style?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really good thing. And I honestly think it's going to be a really big benefit of this situation for companies like ours, because we've had a lot of conversations pre-pandemic about this topic, and really trying to disassociate the idea of coming into the office from 8:30 to 5:30 being a measurement of productivity. I think it can be to some extent, but it's probably not the best measure of productivity. But that's essentially how we've worked. It's just kind of like our work is oftentimes unending. There's always something new that needs attention, whether it's in brokerage or management or accounting. And so people have just kind of said, okay, well, if I come in for this amount of time, then I can get all those tasks done when they need to be. But now this is completely thrown out the window.
Yeah.
And so we've been having conversations as a leadership group about how to establish productivity measurements that are not just clocking in and clocking out. And we do have some people who have struggled to meet really kind of identifiable and basic deadlines. And so I think the first thought is, okay, let me make sure as a leader or as a supervisor that they're spending enough time on those tasks. And again, that's kind of natural to our previous way of thinking about it. But I was really pushing on people to say, well, let's not go there. Let's try to think about what is it that somebody needs to accomplish to meet that overall goal. and check in with them about if they're completing the subtasks that are necessary to get to the final product. That's where we want to go. And so we've asked in some cases for people to report back and say, here's what my day looked like. These are the things that I accomplished at that kind of subtask level, if you will. And then the supervisor can come in and say, oh, okay, well, you're not working on the right things in order to accomplish this. So let's shift your priorities a little bit. And maybe they were able to do that successfully when they were clocking in, clocking out, but it's not working right now for whatever reason. So it's a broad way of saying we have to look at deliverables instead of just hours in the office. And that's something I think will actually be a benefit from this whole situation.
Absolutely. It sounds like you have a line of communication that's fully open. So if employees are feeling, or if there is an obstacle in their way or something that's just not working, that's preventing them from hitting those measurements, that they could come and talk to you. Would you say that that's, your whole leadership team and management team has that same style? Is that, a cultural norm?
Yeah, I mean, that's always a hard line to maintain, but I would say, yeah, I think it's built on the assumption that we're not assuming that an employee is spending all day watching Netflix at home, right? The assumption is that the assumption is that they're doing a good job, and it's a natural feeling. I got to say, as a small business owner, you start to think, well, oh my gosh, I'm paying all these people, and they're not going to do anything. Well, that's not actually how it's going to work. If you have relationships with people and the jobs are constructed right, they're not going to just go home and shirk all their responsibilities. They're going to be trying to make it work. So you start with that assumption, like, okay, they're doing their best, but something's getting in their way. It could be that, we're used to having 2 monitors. And as simple as that sounds, that's a huge productivity issue when you go home and you're working off of a laptop that we provided,
Yes.
right? So we cannibalized a bunch of stations and we started sending monitors home with people so that they could have 2 screens. Well, that solved a bunch of productivity issues, right? But it was built on the assumption that they're doing their best, they just don't have what they need. And so that's where you start. And then, you do get into situations where maybe somebody is not doing a good job. That probably was something you should have known before the pandemic, and it may be becoming even more acute now. But if that's the case, then you go ahead and you handle it as a performance issue. And you don't have to change your policies around that. You just execute it in this new environment.
Great. Wonderful. Well, culture seems to be something you pay a lot of attention to. I'd love to talk a little bit more about that. The considerations that you're thinking about as you look at moving forward. How do you think that or I guess, what are you grasping from in your own network, or books that you're reading, or articles or resources that are helping you start to cultivate what that new culture or revamped culture looks like, say, 3 months or 6 months down the road?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we started to think about immediately is so much good interaction between our staff and the others that we work with outside of the people we employ just happened naturally in the office, and we needed to think about ways to connect people in this virtual environment. So it's maybe again kind of counterintuitive, but we made our all staff meetings more frequent instead of less frequent. And so, we meet every other week, which for us is about the right rhythm now. It used to be every month, because one of those meetings really needed to be dedicated just to how are people navigating this at home? What are they doing? How are you exercising when you can't get to a gym, or when it was raining like it is today, you can't go outside as easily, right? So some of it is just based on that interpersonal contact and making sure that we establish a culture of health and a culture of communication and connection between people that was naturally happening just when you're together. So that's one thing I think about. The other thing is that we like to do little nice things for our staff. Like, every time somebody starts, we give them a mug that has their name on it, because we're all so addicted to coffee and drinking it all the time that you might as well drink it out of something that keeps it warm. So after a couple of weeks, we realized people were suffering a little bit just being home and not having some of those amenities from the office. So we decided, okay, we can support local business by picking up some nice little treats from companies in Portland. We used a company that actually specializes in bringing those kinds of things together and delivering them. And then we sent a little care package out to all of our employees, which I've heard other companies have done. And I think that's a nice move, especially if it's supporting the local economy. But I couldn't believe how thankful people were about that, having some fresh coffee and some cookies and something sweet to eat, which we're always enjoying in the office. And so I think when you set culture, that if you've done things that are good already, you have to find a new way to keep doing them, is basically what that little gesture meant. And so it's probably not something we can do every day or every week or every month even, but just as we were really settling into this, it was a nice thing for people to see and feel like they had a little taste of the culture at the office while they were at their homes.
I love that. That is, I haven't heard of anybody doing that. So, I think that's incredible. That's powerful stuff. When I ran out of coffee the first time, there was serious panic. I mean, it was like, what does this mean? I didn't have a coffee grinder, and that was another thing. I was like, I think there's beans somewhere in this house, but like they're there for a reason because I don't know how to do this. So we got creative, and I found a delivery service and supporting local business, which is beautiful. It's been really fun to connect with the community in a new way.
We had a big debate about ground coffee or whole bean, like which one do we send? And luckily our office manager was able to know basically down to the person if they would have a coffee grinder or not, or if they wanted tea instead of coffee. So thankfully she really understood it and it made it easy.
Well, I wasn't the only one, because many were out of stock online. So I was like, well, here we go. So
here we go.
Wonderful. Well, I guess this kind of helped, we're getting towards the end. You said you were okay with this, so I'm excited to kind of hear your thoughts. Your industry is incredibly impacted by this. Definitely one of the ones that's feeling this more than others and in different ways. I'd love your crystal ball conversation now. So what are some of the predictions you're making for yourself, your own organization if you want, but at the broader level from an industry perspective that you see changing for the long term, or you see really setting great companies with great leaders apart from those that are not keeping up with the times, and just kind of your wisdom?
Yeah. Gosh, it's hard to find that wisdom in this situation, and I think that kind of leads to one of my first responses to that, and that is that we learned a lot through the Great Recession about how a downturn like this is going to affect commercial real estate, because it had such a big impact on the retail sector at that moment, and then had all kinds of ripple effect that touched everybody. But we've seen the transition to online sales and how that's impacted the industrial sector, for example. I mean, the industrial went from the kind of backwaters of commercial real estate to the darling over the last 10 years. And frankly, I don't see that changing with the pandemic, because as we all know, we're relying upon Amazon and other delivery services to bring so many things to our houses. So I don't see that changing. What I think will be the real interesting thing to watch here is that the direct government support that's come out from during this pandemic, through unemployment benefits, through paycheck protection program, through the disaster recovery loans, I think the impact of that's going to be very interesting, because I've heard multiple cases across our portfolio where restaurants in particular, but other retail businesses in general, have laid off their employees, then subsequently received a paycheck protection loan, and the employees have either not wanted to come back because they're doing better with the unemployment benefit, or there are other complications that those businesses find when they're trying to figure out how to use those funds or carry on. And so that's like a whole new variable that we didn't know about before. And I think it puts some real stress on those small business owners to think about, what do I do with that loan? Do I return it? Which is still something that's viable at this moment. How do I support my employees? Because I'm not the only one thinking about that, but somebody in the seat of a restaurant or a small retail business is really thinking about that too. So I think the impact of that is going to be very interesting, and it's probably true but unfortunate that many companies that are in that sector will not survive, and that will have a ripple effect for us in commercial real estate as we either try to replace those tenants or support them while we can, and then ultimately replace them if they don't make it. At the larger national level, a really interesting thing we're tracking is how national retailers are handling this situation. And some have been able to operate throughout this, and yet we're frequently getting rent relief requests from them, like we have from a mom and pop business that's local. And so thinking through how you respond to that is interesting, because it doesn't come as a heartfelt request. It comes as a letter from the corporate lawyer. And of course, we want that tenant. That's our partner in a property. We want them to operate. We're glad they've been able to. How do we respond to a rent relief request? So that's something that we're really struggling through at the moment. And then lastly, I guess one of the big question marks is the way in which lenders are handling this is a huge consideration in the commercial real estate industry, because there's a broad array of responses right now from local lenders, banks or credit unions, that are very different from larger lenders that are nationwide, or perhaps life insurance companies or things like that. And we're seeing that landlords are having a broad variety of responses from their requests to defer their mortgages or their interest. And so I think that's still yet to play out completely.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that's, I know this is a hard question because we're in the thick of it as we stand right now, and we have no idea what to really predict because we don't know where we're going on this journey. But, I think as Portland, the size that it is and the connection that this community has with each other, especially exactly in the point of small to medium-sized businesses, we're a unique town. I mean, in that we only have 2 Fortune 500 companies, and we're not built in the way that other metropolitan areas are built, even though size-wise, we could probably compete. That community aspect becomes all the more important at a time like this, and that you really do start to see people wrap their arms around each other in a different way. You see those and you hear of those that are standing out, you as one of them, what NAI is doing and how you're leading. The great leaders, I think, are going to get a lot of attention, and I hope that means great things for you. And additionally, I mean, those that are struggling to keep up, there's hopefully a strong sense of networking to look out and find those that are doing it well and learn and keep your student hat on as much as possible from the educator in you. I'm sure you agree, is just be open, be curious, and find ways to innovate, because that's the only way to stay alive right now.
Yeah, one thing I would say to build on that, which we talked about in our earlier call, is that we believe that having a network to support our company is fundamental to success, just kind of in the current landscape, even pre-pandemic, but certainly now in the pandemic. And so one of the things that I've relied upon a lot is that NEI Global is this association, if you will, of commercial real estate firms all over the world, primarily the United States, but there are offices all over the world, about 400 total. And the unique nature of that is that they're all independently owned commercial real estate businesses that choose to affiliate in this network and then have exclusive rights to a territory. So, NAI Elliott is the NAI global representative for Portland, Oregon. There's one in Seattle, there's one in Bend, there's one in Boise, there's one in Spokane. They're all over the country. And so the reason I explain it that way is that by nature, we are incentivized to collaborate with each other to make the overall network successful and refer business to each other. And so we have really, really benefited as a company from the resources that are available on the network during this time. Our central office in New York has done a fantastic job pushing out literature and leadership articles, or how to respond to specific commercial real estate issues or just employment issues in general. And then we've actually been doing Zoom calls in our region to touch base about how are we handling things in Seattle and Spokane and Portland and Bend, et cetera. And those conversations have been great because there's no concern that you're dealing with a competitor in our industry. You're dealing with a partner. And so we're very accustomed to sharing, well, this is how we're handling this, or this is how we're handling that, and sharing resources. And that has been very, very helpful for us.
That's great. Yeah. I mean, that collaboration and without the sense of competitiveness, I'm sure is such a blessing in a lot of ways. And it is, probably interesting to do it regionally, because our region is in such a different spot outside of, where you're, kind of across the country, East Coast side, I have friends in other states that are feeling it very differently than we are, and felt it at like a very different progression than we have in the Northwest. So interesting. Well, that wraps up what I have for questions. I'd love, if there's any last thoughts that you have, I'm happy to give you the platform right now to say them.
Well, I really appreciate the conversation. It was fun setting it up, and it was fun doing it here. And I hope that there's some valuable insights that are useful for small business owners out there, whatever industry they might be in. Uh, and as you kind of inquired earlier, I'm very happy to talk with anybody about if they have follow-up questions or wondering how we did something, or the way we're looking at particular situations. So that offer is out there. But I think in general, the way that you and Boly Welsh have set this conversation up as a resource for others is the kind of thing we have to do in order to survive this, is kind of bring the different levels of expertise that are complementary, and not necessarily in our case another commercial real estate company, but one of our partners in recruiting, to bring those ideas together and share them. I think that's a valuable thing for us to be doing in general, but even more so right now.
Thank you. Yes. And I was going to ask if you're open to people reaching out. So thank you for saying that. I'm sure that people will have questions, and you seem very open to the networking. So I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
happy to help.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been wonderful getting to know you, and best of luck to you.
Thanks, Amy. It's been fun.
Thank you.